Gaslighting. Imagine a person who begins, ever so gently, by telling you that you are not seeing things clearly. At first, you resist. You know your mind. You know the way you think. You trust yourself. But little by little, doubt begins to creep in, almost like fog rolling over a familiar landscape, making everything harder to see. You begin to wonder, perhaps they are right. Maybe you do overreact. Maybe you are not as rational as you once believed. What begins as a faint whisper of uncertainty slowly grows into a steady rhythm, echoing in your thoughts until you find yourself no longer certain of what is real. This is the essence of gaslighting, a subtle yet devastating psychological weapon designed not just to deceive you, but to dismantle the very foundation of your reality. Gaslighting does not work like ordinary lies. Gaslighting does not work like ordinary lies. A simple lie can be confronted, disproved, or rejected. Gaslighting, on the other hand, is more insidious. It does not simply replace truth with falsehood. It attempts to erase truth altogether, rewriting your perception of reality until you can no longer distinguish between what you see with your own eyes and what the manipulator insists is true. By the time you begin to realize what has been happening, if realization even comes, the trap may already be set. The term itself comes from a 1944 film called Gaslight, where a husband dims the lamps in the home but insists that nothing has changed. His wife notices the lights flickering, but he calmly denies it again and again until she begins to question her own senses, her memory, even her sanity. This tactic is not limited to the screen. In the real world, gaslighting has been used in toxic relationships, manipulative groups, politics, and even corporations seeking to control their employees. It works because it does not attack the outside world. It attacks the mind directly. The first stage is often denial. You confront the manipulator with something they said or did, but they respond with cold certainty. "I never said that. You're imagining things." At first, you defend yourself. You know what you heard. You remember the words. But when denials come again and again, like waves crashing against stone, your confidence begins to erode. The next stage is to undermine your ability to think clearly. The manipulator may accuse you of being dramatic, of exaggerating, of reading too much into things. You hear phrases like, "You're always overanalyzing," or "You can't ever take a joke." At first, you dismiss them, but repeated often enough, they become seeds planted in your mind, and slowly, they begin to grow. You find yourself questioning whether you truly did overreact, whether your judgment can really be trusted. Then comes the attack on your emotions. Anytime you react, your feelings are dismissed. "Why are you so sensitive? You always blow things out of proportion." Soon, you begin to doubt not just your judgment, but even your right to feel. You apologize when no apology is needed. You shrink back from defending yourself. The boundaries of your selfhood weaken, and with them, your sense of reality. Finally, gaslighting isolates. The manipulator begins to cut you off from outside voices that might ground you. They insist that your friends do not understand you. They insist that your friends do not understand you, that outsiders are against you. Bit by bit, the world beyond the manipulator fades until they alone stand as the sole authority on what is true and what is false. At this point, they no longer need to manipulate you actively. You do it to yourself. You silence your own doubts before they have the chance to speak. Gaslighting is terrifying not because it merely changes what you believe, but because it reshapes who you are. It rewires your identity, convinces you to betray your own senses, and gradually hands control of your mind to someone else. By the time the curtain is pulled back, if it ever is, breaking free feels nearly impossible. For how do you resist when you are no longer sure what is real? Brainwashing. In our world today, we often see people who appear to live in a different reality. They defend the indefensible. They deny what is obvious. They cling to ideas that make no sense to others. To an outsider, it seems baffling. How can someone become so deeply convinced of something that seems so clearly false? The answer lies in one of the most powerful psychological tools ever developed: brainwashing. Unlike what many imagine, brainwashing is not simply a scene from a dystopian novel or a science fiction film. It is real, it is structured, and perhaps most frightening of all, no one is fully immune. One of the most chilling examples in modern history is the tragedy of Jonestown in 1978. Over 900 people, including children, lost their lives after drinking cyanide-laced punch under the orders of cult leader Jim Jones. These were not people who suddenly, without thought, decided to follow a madman to their deaths. They were ordinary individuals who, step by step, had been led down a path until their critical thinking was dismantled piece by piece. They believed they were making their own choices. They believed they were acting with reason, and that is the dark brilliance of brainwashing. It does not feel forced. It feels chosen. So, how does such a transformation occur? The process is not random. It follows a deliberate pattern: isolation, destabilization, indoctrination, and reinforcement. Each stage is designed to peel away a person's defenses until they become entirely dependent on the new framework of thought. The first step is isolation. When you control the flow of information someone has access to, you begin to control their perception of reality itself. Jim Jones achieved this by moving his followers to a remote settlement deep in the jungles of Guyana, far from outside voices. Without friends, without family, without familiar surroundings, the followers' world narrowed until only Jones's words remained. In modern life, isolation may not always look so dramatic, but the effect is the same. Media bubbles, online echo chambers, extremist groups, even toxic relationships. All of these work by cutting people off from perspectives that might challenge the narrative. When one voice dominates, all other voices fade, and the ability to compare, to question, slowly withers away. Once isolation is in place, destabilization begins. The goal is to break down mental resistance by creating confusion, exhaustion, and fear. Cults may use endless sermons, sudden punishments, or emotional breakdown sessions. Governments may employ constant crisis messaging, insisting that the world is too dangerous, too chaotic to understand without their guidance. The more drained a person becomes, mentally, emotionally, physically, the more they lean on the manipulator for clarity. It feels easier to surrender their thinking than to struggle against the storm. After this comes indoctrination, the implantation of new beliefs. The group, and you are praised. Doubt or resist, and you are punished, perhaps with exile, shaming, or rejection. Over time, this conditioning rewires the brain. The beliefs that once felt unnatural slowly become the new baseline. It no longer feels like submission. It feels like truth. The final stage is reinforcement. Once the new identity has taken root, it is continually strengthened. Rituals, group loyalty, chants, symbols, repeated narratives, all these serve as constant reminders of the new reality. Manipulation does not even feel like manipulation. The individual believes they have awakened, that they now see the world clearly. The irony is cruel. Those who are most controlled often feel the most free. And this, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing about brainwashing. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like coercion. It feels like enlightenment. People remain in toxic groups, follow destructive leaders, or cling to harmful ideologies not because they are trapped by force, but because they genuinely believe. They do not feel brainwashed. They feel chosen. How, then, can we protect ourselves? The first defense is awareness. Brainwashing thrives in the absence of critical thought. When you feel pressured not to question, when doubt itself is painted as betrayal, that is a red flag. The second defense is exposure to multiple perspectives. If your information always comes from one voice, no matter how convincing, you are being guided, perhaps even controlled. And the third defense is mindfulness of emotion. Fear, guilt, outrage. These are the levers used to bypass logic. Whenever you feel your emotions being manipulated, pause and ask, who benefits from me feeling this way? Because once the mind has been rewritten, the person inside may never even realize it happened. Love bombing. At first, it feels like something out of a dream, a sudden rush of attention, waves of affection, and words so sweet they almost seem unreal. Someone looks at you with shining eyes and tells you that you are unlike anyone they have ever met. They flood you with compliments, with messages, with promises. You feel special, seen, cherished in a way you may have longed for but never truly experienced. It is intoxicating, exhilarating, like stepping into a love story you never thought possible. This is the opening act of love bombing, a powerful form of manipulation that disguises itself as devotion. The brilliance of love bombing is that it does not attack your defenses directly. Instead, it overwhelms them with kindness, with flattery, with connection. It hijacks the brain's natural reward system. Every text, every compliment, every sudden gift triggers dopamine, the same chemical that fuels addiction. And like any addiction, the first high feels unforgettable. The manipulator knows this. They want you hooked, craving the next message, the next reassurance, the next dazzling display of affection. In romantic relationships, love bombing may appear as extravagant gifts, rushed declarations of forever, or an intensity that feels almost too much, too soon. In friendships, it might look like a bond that forms overnight, with someone insisting that you are their soulmate friend, that you understand them like no one else. In workplaces, it might be a boss who showers you with praise, makes you feel indispensable, and fills you with the belief that you are exceptional. Whatever the form, the energy is the same: relentless positivity, overwhelming intensity, and a pace so fast it leaves you breathless. But the true manipulation does not lie in the flood of affection. It lies in what happens next. Because eventually, the flood becomes a trickle. The constant texts stop. The compliments fade. The warmth cools. And the person who once made you feel like the most extraordinary soul in the world now looks at you with indifference, or worse, with criticism. Confused, you begin to wonder, what changed? Did I do something wrong? Instead of recognizing the pattern, you turn inward, searching for faults, lowering your boundaries, working harder to regain the affection you once received so easily. This is the trap: intermittent reinforcement. The same psychological mechanism that makes gambling addictive. A slot machine does not reward you every time. It rewards you just enough to keep you pulling the lever. Love bombing works the same way. The affection returns, but only sometimes, unpredictably, like sunlight breaking through clouds at random. And because you never know when it will return, you cling harder, tolerate more, and chase the memory of that first high. Over time, this cycle erodes your stability. The highs and lows become exhausting. Your self-worth becomes tied to the manipulator's approval. You start to believe that if you just try harder, if you just give more, you will once again be showered with that dazzling love. You don't realize that the honeymoon phase was never real. It was a performance, carefully constructed to bind you. Love bombing is not limited to romance. Cult leaders often use it, flooding new members with overwhelming kindness, attention, and acceptance. For someone lonely or lost, this flood of connection feels like salvation. But once devotion is secured, the warmth turns cold and obedience is demanded. Workplaces too can use this tactic, lavishing employees with praise at first, only to later manipulate them into overworking, always hoping for the return of that early validation. The cruelty of love bombing is in its rhythm: intensity followed by withdrawal, affection followed by absence. It leaves the victim chasing something that was never truly there, pouring their energy into restoring a bond that was manufactured from the start. By the time the pattern becomes clear, the exhaustion, the doubt, and the dependency are already deep. Love bombing feels like love. It feels like destiny, but it is not love. It is bait. A carefully woven illusion designed not to cherish you, but to capture you. And once the spell fades, breaking free can feel harder than staying trapped, because the memory of that intoxicating beginning still whispers in your mind, making you wonder if it could return. If only you tried harder. If only you tried harder. Guilt tripping and shame. Not all chains are made of metal, and not every prison has walls. Some of the most powerful forms of control come wrapped in silence, in sighs, in subtle words that leave you feeling heavy with guilt. Sometimes it doesn't take shouting or threats to move a person. All it takes is one carefully placed sentence, one whispered reminder that you are not doing enough, that you are failing someone, that you are failing someone, that you are failing someone, that you are the cause of their pain. This is the quiet strength of guilt tripping, a manipulation so soft it often feels like you are making your own choices, when in truth your emotions are being pulled like strings. Think of how many times you have agreed to something not because you wanted to, but because you felt bad saying no. Maybe you accepted a favor when you were exhausted. Maybe you apologized when you weren't at fault. Maybe you stayed in a situation you weren't at fault. Maybe you stayed in a situation you wanted to leave because walking away felt like abandoning someone. That unease, that pressure to act, not from desire, but from obligation, is guilt at work. And guilt is a tool that, in the hands of a manipulator, can become a leash. The process begins with planting a seed. The manipulator twists reality just slightly, shaping it so that you feel responsible for their suffering. A parent sighs, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" A friend withdraws, saying, "I guess I don't matter to you anymore." A partner insists, "I've sacrificed so much for this relationship, and you would just walk away?" None of these statements give direct orders. They don't have to. The guilt does the work. The weight lands on your chest, and suddenly you feel compelled to give in. But guilt alone is not always enough. That is when the manipulator reaches for something deeper, shame. While guilt tells you that you have done something deeper, shame. Wrong. Shame tells you that you are wrong. Guilt says, "You forgot my birthday." Shame says, "You are a terrible friend." Guilt says, "You made a mistake." Shame says, "You are incompetent." The difference may seem small, but the impact is devastating. When guilt weighs you down, you can try to make amends. But when shame settles in your heart, it convinces you that you are broken at the core. And if you are broken, why resist? Why fight back? This is why guilt and shame are such effective tools of control. Cult leaders use them to keep members in line, making them feel they are never good enough, that they owe their loyalty forever. Abusive partners use them to trap their victims, convincing them that they are selfish, ungrateful, or worthless if they even think of leaving. Manipulative bosses use them to make employees work harder, not out of passion, but out of fear that they will never measure up. If you can convince someone that they are fundamentally flawed, they will spend their life trying to prove otherwise, always striving, always bending, always apologizing. The cruelest part is that, over time, the outside manipulator is no longer needed. The victim begins to guilt trip themselves. The words that were once spoken by others turn into an inner voice, whispering constantly, "I shouldn't say no. I don't deserve to rest. I'm not good enough." When this happens, the manipulation is complete. The person no longer needs to be pushed or pressured. They control themselves through self-inflicted guilt and shame. Breaking free begins with recognition. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I truly want to, or because I am afraid of being seen as selfish, ungrateful, or unworthy? Am I accepting blame that doesn't belong to me? Am I trying to earn approval that always seems out of reach? When you begin to earn approval that always seems out of reach, when you begin their hold, guilt and shame are not proof of your worth. No one else gets to decide your value. The moment you stop carrying burdens that were never yours, the chains begin to loosen. And when the chains fall away, you realize that the weight you felt all along was never part of who you were. It was a story placed on your shoulders by someone else. Cultivating dependence. Dependence rarely begins with chains. It begins with comfort, with someone stepping in at just the right moment, offering guidance, protection, or care when you feel lost. At first, it feels safe. It feels like having a lighthouse in the fog. But slowly, almost invisibly, that comfort turns into reliance, and reliance turns into dependence. What once felt like support begins to feel like survival. You cannot imagine making choices, solving problems, or moving forward without that guiding hand. A skilled manipulator knows this well. They will not demand control outright. Instead, they create a world where their presence seems essential. They solve problems for you. They speak on your behalf. They tell you what is best. At first, it seems like kindness. You may even feel grateful for the help. But slowly, the help becomes expectation. The manipulator convinces you that you are incapable on your own. They whisper, or sometimes declare, that without them, you would collapse. And when you begin to believe it, the dependence takes root. This cultivation of reliance is often paired with the earlier tools, gaslighting, brainwashing, love bombing, and guilt tripping. Together, they strip away confidence, self-trust, and independence. Gaslighting makes you doubt your own memory and judgment. Brainwashing reshapes your beliefs. Love bombing makes you crave approval. Guilt tripping weighs you down with responsibility and shame. And finally, dependence seals the cycle by convincing you that escape is impossible, that you are too weak, too broken, too lost to survive on your own. Think of how a bird is kept in a cage. Over time, even if the door is left open, the bird may not fly away. It forgets the sky, forgets its own wings. Dependence works the same way. A person who has been manipulated into dependence may no longer recognize their own abilities. They may even fear freedom because the world outside the manipulator's control feels too uncertain, too frightening. Even if it is made of lies, this tactic is not confined to personal relationships. Entire systems of control rely on cultivating dependence. Governments may present themselves as protectors, creating fear so that citizens believe they cannot survive without their rule. Corporations may convince consumers that they need their products, even for basic well-being. Religious or ideological movements may teach followers that salvation, purpose, or worth can only be found through continued loyalty. In every case, the goal is the same: to make the individual forget that they ever had the power to stand alone. But the truth is that independence does not vanish. It only sleeps. Beneath the weight of fear and doubt, the self remains, waiting. To break free, one must begin with small steps. A choice made without permission, a voice spoken without apology, a decision trusted even if it feels uncertain. Every act of self-reliance is a crack in the cage, a reminder that your wings still work. Dependence is cultivated over time, but freedom is also cultivated. Each step you take toward self-trust is a seed planted in your spirit, and like any seed, it grows quietly, invisibly, until one day it blooms. You may wake up and realize that the guidance you thought you needed was never as strong as the strength you carried within all along. When that day comes, the manipulator's power dissolves, because no one can control a person who has remembered their own worth, who has rediscovered their ability to choose, to decide, to act freely. Dependence is a shadow. Independence is the light that makes it vanish. And as you drift deeper into rest, you can hold on to this truth. The strength to stand on your own has always been there, steady and waiting, like a flame that never goes out.